We began this series a few months ago looking for some lessons we might be able to find from, I called him a legendary leader to get the alliteration going, but really from maybe the wisest man who ever lived. God gave him that much wisdom. And per capita, the richest man who ever lived. So you figure he'd have something to say to you. He'd have something to illustrate for you by his lifestyle. Wisest ever lived, richest ever lived. And so that's what we've been doing these last few months. We spent the first half of the series looking at bad lessons you can learn from the life of Solomon. And then the last half of the series, we've been over in the book of Proverbs, primarily, some in Ecclesiastes, looking at good lessons we can learn from this legendary leader. And today is the last of the lessons, and so I saved for last Solomon's most prominent lesson and his most prominent teaching. You might, in fact, say that the entire book of Proverbs is about wisdom, where it comes from, how to get it, and how to keep it. And that's what we're going to look at in this last lesson this morning. And we're going to start with Proverbs 16:16, where it says, "How much better to get wisdom than gold, and how much better to get good judgment than silver." I wonder how many of us really believe that. Deep down, I wonder how much I really believe that. How much better to get wisdom than gold? You know, the price of gold's pretty good right now. How much better to get good judgment than to get silver? So that's the way I wanted to begin the lesson, because we're going to talk about the ways that wisdom is better than gold, and that good judgment is better than silver. In ancient societies, houses were often built without foundations, but builders learned a very hard lesson pretty quickly, because even though those kinds of houses and structures offered fine protection in good weather, they were not at all dependable in the face of storms, which is why Jesus told the famous parable at the end of the Sermon on the Mount about the house that was built on a proper foundation, a rock foundation, stood, and the one that was built on the sand failed. Today, no architect would consider designing any building without a foundation. It is the foundation that gives the building the integrity upon which all the other structural supports must rely. Without a solid foundation, nothing significant can be built that is certain to endure. Now, it's interesting that we understand that in our physical world, with our houses, with our buildings, with our structures. But the same is true in our spiritual life and in our personal life. And yet most adults believe that their personal and spiritual lives do not need a sturdy foundation. And most adults do not face the day with a well thought out plan. They just live their lives day to day, constantly reacting to every wind of change. And when they encounter the unexpected storms of life that Jesus talked about at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, they are quickly unsettled, and they often make bad decisions or choices, sometimes that have devastating results. Our IQ is the level of raw intelligence that we are all born with. But it's intellectual quotient. But you don't have to have a high IQ to acquire wisdom. You don't. A good many geniuses in this world have acted very foolishly. And the world's most highly educated scholars have no better track record in the area of personal happiness or material success than all the rest of us do. At the same time, the vast majority of the world's most successful people were average in terms of IQ. They were neither scholars nor geniuses, but at critical times in their life, they made wise decisions that catapulted their achievements from mediocrity to the stars. And they had made wisdom the foundation of their life. So in that sense, wisdom is more precious than gold. Now, there is a difference between wisdom and understanding and information or knowledge. Big difference between the three. This is the order in which we should think of them in terms of value. It really is. Knowledge is merely information. We live in an information age. We acquire knowledge. We can acquire more knowledge in a day than our grandparents acquired in a lifetime. But acquiring information doesn't guarantee success or joy or lasting fulfillment. Because if you only acquire information and you don't have understanding, which Solomon also talks about repeatedly, and understanding is the meaning of that information, you won't go anywhere. Understanding is how to distinguish between information that is true and practical and information that is not. Understanding places great value on truth and its practical application. But the thing that Solomon talks about way more than knowledge or understanding is wisdom. Wisdom is the application of what you have understood from what the information you have required. Wisdom involves the will. You must choose, how do I apply it? And our first text that we read today said, gaining wisdom is better than gaining gold. So wisdom goes one step further than the other. It takes those truths that have the greatest value and correctly applies them to circumstances and situations in our life in general. And Solomon placed great value on acquiring understanding and an even higher value on the application of wisdom. In fact, he says storing up knowledge in a wisdom account, you might say, is a really good thing to do. Wise people treasure knowledge, but the babbling of a fool invites disaster. He can draw upon that wisdom whenever he needs it from any situation that requires a wise decision. Whether he needs a solution in a time of trouble or wisdom to capitalize on an opportunity or an open door, he'll always have plenty of knowledge to draw from, Solomon's saying, but not so for the foolish. The foolish is only going to invite disaster. So what are some of the practical ways that wisdom is better than gold? I challenged us with that first verse. Is it really true that wisdom is better than gold? Do we really believe that? Do I really believe that? So how is wisdom better than gold? Well, wisdom helps you understand why you do what you do. Wisdom helps you understand why you act the way you do. How many times have you ever done something stupid or out of character and thought, why on earth did I do that? Or what was I thinking? If you don't understand your behavior and ask yourself that question and figure out the answer to it, you will repeat it again and again and again and again. So it's very important that you understand how to do that. That's not the case when you acquire wisdom. As Solomon says, the prudent understand where they are going, but fools deceive themselves. So if we were back on our little chart a minute ago, you might say fools occasionally get up step one, some knowledge, some information. But they never advance to step two, which is information and the meaning of it. And so the understanding and the meaning of the information, and they certainly never get to stage three, which is the wisdom and the application of it. The prudent understand where they're going because they have combined all three. The fools stop at level one with just gaining information. If you don't understand your behavior, you can never correct it. As you begin to more clearly understand your behavior and natural inclinations, you'll begin to make the best choices for yourself rather than those choices to which you are naturally inclined. Do not pass by what I just said easily. All of us, by either our background, the training of our parents, the comfortability of our life, our IQ, our EQ, our emotional quotient, all of us are prone to act in a certain behavior. We are naturally inclined over time to act in a certain way. Unless you get wisdom that comes from understanding that came from knowledge. Ponce de Leon was the first European to set foot in Florida. You remember he was searching for the fountain of youth, right? He never found it, but they claim that he found it in St. Augustine, Florida. And I have taken several drinks from that. Can you tell it helped? I wasn't able to. I wasn't able to tell it gave me any wisdom at all. But Solomon reveals a much more practical and miraculous fountain in Proverbs chapter 16. He said, discretion is a life-giving fountain to those who possess it, but discipline is wasted on fools. A life-giving fountain. What is it? Understanding, discretion. Like a fountain, understanding not only brings life to your deepest needs and desires, it makes you a source of life to others around you as well. What is the value of wisdom? This kind of wisdom that Solomon wants us to get. Well, it brings us the favor of those who are in authority. When you were a child, nothing was better than having a coach or a teacher smile at you and pat you on the back and say, way to go, great job. All of us wanted that as a child. The same is true for adults. We hate having a person in authority mad at us, whether it is our spouse or our boss or a police officer or anybody in some authority mad at us. Solomon tells us that when we act wisely, we will gain the favor of those who are in authority. A king rejoices in wise servants, but he's angry with those who disgrace him. That's probably a thought very few people in this room have ever had. What is one of the values of gaining information, then understanding, then wisdom in that order? Well, a king or those in that position, positions of great authority, will rejoice in you, will favor you, will pick you, will trust you, while those who do not work on those areas of life will be disgraced by those who are in authority. Solomon also said, a sensible person wins admiration, but a warped mind is despised. Same thing as the previous verse. So you will win the favor of those in any position of authority when you act more wisely. He says multiple times in this book of Proverbs that riches are a result of wise decisions and wise actions. And he's talking there about material riches, but also spiritual riches. Now, they're different, you know. Material riches can be measured in terms of gold and silver and portfolios and bank accounts and possessions. But spiritual riches are even more valuable than those, and they are measured by the love and fulfillment and joy and peace and purpose you experience, and the way you help other people experience those same qualities. Too many people, by the way, sacrifice spiritual riches in the pursuit of material riches. I'm convinced that attaining material riches requires much less wisdom than getting spiritual riches. Solomon tells us, though, that the wise man or woman can get both simultaneously. Wealth is a crown for the wise. The effort of fools yields only foolishness. That's why the richest man who ever lived could say, with the verse we led with this morning, how much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is much better than getting silver. That's why he could say that. But another advantage of gaining wisdom that Solomon wrote about in the Proverbs is protection and safety. We're all interested in protection and safety in this world in which we live. And Proverbs 2 says, wise choices will watch over you. Understanding will keep you safe. Wisdom will save you from evil people, from those whose words are twisted. It's not hard at all. Not difficult at all to apply that 3,000 years after it was written to everyday life. Wise people keep their eyes open when they are out in the public, in dark places, leaving a mall, leaving a restaurant. In that sense, wise choices will watch over you, and understanding will keep you safe. Foolish people might leave the same mall, the same restaurant, a little inebriated or not careful, and be the easy victim of targets. Just one way to apply that today that is obviously true even in our society. Wisdom protects us not only from dangerous situations, but equally important, from falling prey to people driven by unethical values and motives or intentions. The person who wants to con you out of your life savings, or the business associate who wants you to close your eyes to the unethical decision or practice. Solomon is talking about gaining a level of discernment that can see right through the facades of unscrupulous people in any age. He's saying that this kind of discernment and understanding and wisdom will protect you, will watch over you in such compromising situations. That is highly valuable. So, we've talked about some of the things Solomon might have meant when he said to gain wisdom is better than to gain gold. Let's go the opposite route here for just a minute. What are the consequences of not gaining wisdom? Well, I think, first of all, we can easily say a life without purpose and fulfillment and happiness. In Proverbs 21:16, Solomon says, the person who strays from common sense will end up in the company of the dead. That's pretty strong talk. He's talking about those people who are physically alive but spiritually dead. And they're spiritually dead and just existing because their lives are not built on the proper values. What are the consequences of not gaining wisdom? Well, decisions that may look good initially, but end badly. And we've all made that kind of decision. We all have. So many times in life, we think we are making the right choice only to discover it was the wrong choice. Recently, a woman in our community was driving her little girl to a friend's house when she was shot by her ex-husband as he drove up next to her car. Then he turned the gun to himself and killed himself. Now, a few years ago, when this woman was madly in love with this man, she believed she was making the right choice when she married him. She saw signs of his uncontrollable temper, but she thought she could change him, and she thought he would never turn his anger toward her. After all, he was as much in love with her as she was with him. Never thought that a decision that looked so good a few years later would look so deadly, literally. But you know, there's that old verse in Proverbs 14:12 that says there is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. If you remember it from the old King James Version, it says there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Without wisdom, there is no way we can have an assurance that decisions we make will be right, not only for the moment, but more importantly, for all of life. And then another consequence, and this may be the biggest one in terms of the way it affects me, in terms of the way I think it affects most of us in everyday life today. Another consequence of not gaining the kind of wisdom that Solomon is talking about is self-deception. You deceive yourself. According to police officers, here are the three most common things people say when they are pulled over for traffic violations. What did I do? I wasn't doing anything wrong. Everybody else was doing the same thing. They really believe that they weren't doing anything wrong. They really believe that everybody else was doing the same thing. Every man's way is right in his own sight. And the consequences of self-deception can be ruinous. I mean, the times when I've been most disappointed in me, in my life, are when I have fallen prey to self-deception. When I have gone a way that seemed right, although I had a few little questions about it, but in the end, it wasn't right. Self-deception stalks everyone who fails to build a life without that foundation of wisdom we talked about in the first few minutes. To me, the most extreme example of it I read recently in an article in the Wall Street Journal that was unbelievable to me. It gave facts that I did not know about the fall of Hitler in Germany. And the most extreme example was Adolf Hitler's suicide note. This is purported to actually be it. Now, unless you read German, you're not going to be reading this thing, but this is purported to be it. At the end of World War II, after exterminating millions of Jews, with his nation's capital little more than piles of rubble and his whole nation in ruins, he opened his suicide note with these words, "I die with a happy heart." He goes on to say that he knew his nation one day would unite to continue the work he had begun, and that international Jewry must bear sole responsibility for the war. You talk about self-deception. Internationally, Jews must accept responsibility for the war that he clearly started, And though he has clearly killed millions of people and ruined his own country, his first words were, "I die happy." You talking about self-deception. But you know what? He's very similar to the shooter last week in Utah, who wrote to his lover something very similar to that. He actually thought he was going to get away with it. He was so self-deceived. If Satan can get us to fool ourselves, then he doesn't have to do it. And self-deception can be one of the worst forms of disobedience to God. According to Solomon, the only compass that can enable us to see and choose the best path to life is wisdom. And without that compass, which comes to us only from the Word of God, we'll make choices that seem fine at the moment, but will ultimately lead to disappointment or to worse. Now, obviously, one of the consequences of not gaining wisdom is foolish decisions. Solomon's greatest disdain was held for those that he repeatedly in the book categorized as fools. Now, we all make foolish decisions at different times in life, but that doesn't make us fools. Solomon's definition of a fool is a person whose life is built on unwise decisions, building on sand more than on a firm foundation. Many baseball experts believe, for instance, that Ty Cobb, pound for pound, statistic for statistic, was the greatest baseball player in history, far and away the highest batting average in history. And he set more than 90 Major League Baseball records during his career. He amassed an absolute fortune by making one good investment. He was from Central Georgia, and when the Coca-Cola company took off, he invested early in it and amassed fortunes as a result of it. But as a person, as a baseball player, unmatched. As an early investor, unmatched. As a person, all the books and movies that have been made about him. Despite his unbelievable fame, only a few people attended his funeral, and even his own children didn't come. How sad that a man could achieve so much and be loved or valued by so few that not even his own children would come to his funeral. Now, whether or not he fits Solomon's definition of a fool is not my call to make, but certainly that is the danger of living life full of foolish choices. As Solomon said, the words of the godly encourage many, but fools are destroyed by their lack of common sense. Solomon teaches here that if we act like a fool long enough, we're going to become one. And he offers a number of attributes that reveal foolish behavior. And I'm going to share a few of them now in the Proverbs to see if any of them match up with our life. He said, for instance, those who close their ears to instruction are fools. Fear of the Lord is the foundation, talked about foundation early in the lesson, is the foundation of true knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and discipline. A wise man or woman seeks out and values instruction that can help them as they build a foundation of wisdom in their life. Fools, he says, tend to shoot from the hip, say whatever they think whenever it's on their mind. In fact, that's exactly what one of the modern translations of Proverbs 10:14 says. In the NLT, it reads, wise people treasure knowledge, but the babbling of a fool invites disaster. One of the modern translations says they say whatever they think or feel without thorough consideration. And the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Indeed it does. Then he tells us in another verse that one of the problems with not gaining understanding and with acting foolishly is we repeat the same foolish behavior over and over again. It's been attributed to a lot of people, but I think Einstein is probably the actual original author. That the definition of insanity is trying something over and over and over again and expecting different results. That's what a fool does. Does the same thing over and over again and expects different results. Solomon says it this way: as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Rather graphic, but hopefully the graphic nature of that picture that is in your mind right now might keep you from repeating some foolishness. And then he said, fools don't respond to punishment. You cannot separate fools from their foolishness, even though you grind them like grain with mortar and pestle. All of us make foolish decisions when punished by authorities or by life. We usually change our ways, we learn, and we do better. Not so with a fool, just keeps going on, doing the same thing. He also said, fools trust their own heart too much. And it's another consequence of not gaining wisdom from God and from his book. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but whoever walks wisely will be delivered. Sometimes people say, but it just felt so right. It felt like the right thing to do. We all make decisions at some time or another that are based on our emotions, on how we feel. And occasionally that kind of decision may work out, but a person who regularly relies on how he or she feels as the primary factor in their decision making is a fool, according to Solomon. The fact is that our emotions are often blinded or hijacked by our misperceptions. We ignore to seek the counsel of others. We fail to look well into a matter and we act on our feelings rather than what our research shows. Yeah, we can take our feelings into consideration when we're making a decision, but we shouldn't base any decision just on our feelings. It is a sure way to crash and burn. And it is a big, big concern of mine these days because I have watched over the last 20 or 30 years. I'll say a little bit more about this in the sermon today because I think it's so important. I have watched our society move from a facts-based culture, we call that modernity, to a postmodern culture that is based more on feelings. And people make their decisions based far more on feelings than they do on facts or a foundation. And that's an extremely dangerous place to be because people are trusting in their own heart and in their own, which is the seat of their emotions, their feelings. And God says to us in his word, no one can trust their own heart. They may even tear down their own house. Our homes should be a safe harbor for us and for our families, and yet for many, homes are anything but that. They are places filled with discouragement and criticism and contention and sometimes physical or verbal or emotional abuse. Proverbs 14:1 says, a wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. What does that mean? Everyone wants loving and fulfilling relationships with their spouse and with their children. And yet they unwisely do so many things that tear each other down and ultimately bring about the dissolution of the marriage and the disintegration of the family. And it often happens through anger, criticism, infidelity. Fools tear down their houses with their own hands. And Solomon contrasts that with a wise man or a wise woman who does everything they can to encourage and love their family building their home into a safe harbor, which is what homes were meant to be, particularly Christian homes. So let's spend our last 5 to 10 minutes talking about how we can acquire the kind of wisdom Solomon talks about. He said, wisdom is more valuable than gold. I hope we believe that, or believe it as much as we can. He said, understanding is better than silver. I hope we believe that. So we talked about what are the benefits of gaining that kind of wisdom, and we talked about what are the consequences of not. Now let's talk a little bit about how to obtain it. Search for wisdom like you would search for hidden or buried treasure. Proverbs 2 says, turn your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding. Cry out for insight and ask for understanding. Search for them as you would for silver. Seek them like hidden treasures. Then you will understand what it means to fear the Lord, and you will gain knowledge of God. For the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. If you search for wisdom like hidden treasures, he grants it. He grants it. That's what the Bible says. Few treasures are just laying out there in plain sight. We had the Princess Tea yesterday for our young girls, and one of the fun things about it always is the treasure hunt, where they're going to find things, and nothing that they're looking for is just out in plain sight. It's hidden. You got to search for it. You got to earn it. You got to go get it. That's what he says about wisdom. And pursue it with the passion of a 5 or 6 year old girl looking for those prizes yesterday, or a gold miner back in 49 looking for gold. Then he said, if you want to be wise, you have to learn to listen. Sometimes you have to learn to shut up and listen. Go into every situation asking questions instead of giving answers. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance by exploring the meaning in these parables, proverbs and parables, by exploring the words of the wise and their riddles. That is the way you become wise. You listen. Wisdom does not come from within. If it did, we wouldn't need to get any more. We would already have it. Wisdom comes from sources outside of ourselves. So remember the benefits of seeking such counsel. And then if you want to get wisdom, the third thing I would suggest to you is study the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 4 says, my child, pay attention to what I say. Listen carefully to my words. Don't lose sight of them. Let them penetrate deep into your heart, for they bring life to those who find them and healing to their whole body. So cue up the video, Sean. When I was doing this lesson about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the NFL was about to kick off their season. And I had the TV on in the background while I was working in my office. And they had a video of the quarterback of the New York Jets named Justin Fields, who had just won the first string quarterback job. And I could not believe what I heard him say. And then I really couldn't believe what I heard him say personally in front of a full room of media people about what the book of Proverbs is meaning to his life. And then I couldn't believe what he said to the reporters. So make sure the sound is up high enough.
So I'm low-key addicted to getting my Bible each and every day, just because I learn something new every day and I'm able to apply it in my everyday life. But I was sleeping on reading the Bible earlier in my life, and I wish I would have started earlier. So I encourage y'all to go read a little bit, start in Proverbs and move on from there.
It should play on, does it? Oh, really? Well, he goes on then. He says, because they asked him, they said, what has made a difference in your life? You seem like a changed player this year. And he said, yeah, I am. I've gone to reading the Bible, and I read the book of Proverbs, and I would encourage all of you to read the book of Proverbs. And then he said to the reporters, you guys should read it too. Some of you need to get a little wisdom, and it would help you. I thought that was the part we had, because somebody just clapped here. I clapped at my desk that day. I thought that was great. Solomon urges us to do the same thing that Justin Field invited the reporters to do. And that is, my son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then you will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. That's what happens when you seek wisdom with all your heart. I've enjoyed sharing these lessons from a legendary leader with you over these last few weeks, and now I'll enjoy it even more if me and many of you begin to apply them, because that's the real point.